where Eddie Perez went wrong. Next. Welcome to the Stan Simpson Show, a program about Connecticut people and compelling issues. Make it a point, will you please, to drop in every week. Hartford Mayor Eddie Perez's days are numbered as a result of his conviction on corruption charges. Today, local lawyers Jim Bergen and Michael Giorgetti discuss where things went wrong for Perez at his trial and whether he has a shot to win an appeal. Then we'll talk with City Councilman Luis Cotto and Ken Kennedy about what is next for Hartford and whether public trust can ever be restored at City Hall. But first, an insider's look at the Perez conviction. Two high-powered lawyers, Giorgetti and Bergen, surprised by the reaction. I believe the conventional wisdom among many lawyers I talked to was that this was going pretty good for Perez. There was reasonable doubt. What happened?
Well, a jury could have found reasonable doubt, and I think this is one of those classic cases why this is why you have a jury. They study the evidence, they decide for themselves, they go back and they deliberate, and this could have gone either way. They obviously were convinced. There was some evidence, it appears, that any reasonable jury could find to be on a reasonable doubt. I don't think it's going to
surprised. Were you personally surprised?
I really can't say I was surprised. I really kind of thought they were going to get acquittal, but I wasn't.
Stan, I sat through quite a bit of the testimony, and I felt, after listening to the testimony that I did, that it was a 50-50 shot. I've said before, and I'll say again, I feel strongly that this was a case that the mayor needed to testify. He needed to get up and tell his story.
Really? Interesting.
I think that the public, although we have a right not to testify, any defendant has a right not to testify, I think when it comes to public figures, political figures especially, the public and a jury expects more. I mean, what is a politician but someone who gets up in front of people and talks all the time and tells their story? I suspect that if he could have gotten up in front of the jury and told his story with sincerity, one or more of the jurors may have acquitted him, or may have at least resulted in a hung jury.
But truth be told, here's a guy who's not very well when he's scripted, putting him in front of a jury with some high-powered lawyers. I've seen guys that, Joe Ganim, get a good prosecutor and they wither. Jim Bergen, your thoughts? Would you put him on the stand?
Well, I'm not going to second-guess the lawyers because they really are very, very good lawyers. And I think that...
what's the case to make for not putting him on the stand?
Well, the problem is then it shifts. The whole case becomes, is he telling the truth? Do I like the guy? And I think the reason that you don't put him on is because then the jury thinks it's about that instead of whether or not the state convinced them beyond a reasonable doubt of this evidence. In other words, it shifts to the individual as opposed to the evidence. And I think that if he didn't perform well, then we've been just taking the opposite point of view now.
Well, the problem, too, also, that he would be exposed to not just the Carlos Costas contractor situation, but also the Abe Giles parking lot issue and other issues. And so Hubie Santo hopefully didn't want to expose him to other questions outside of the kitchen counter questions.
And but putting that aside, there was enough evidence in the prosecutor's case in chief to convict him. There was clear evidence of misdoing, and I think it had to be addressed in the defendant's case. Again, I'm not second-guessing the lawyer because ultimately it's the client's decision whether to testify or not the lawyer's. The lawyer can give advice, and I'm sure his lawyer did. I agree that the mayor does not make a good witness, but I think if he could have told the jury his side of the story with sincerity, they might have forgiven him for his wrongs because, on balance, I don't think the wrongs were that egregious. They didn't shock the conscience.
I'll put my columnist hat on. I got to tell you, knowing Perez as long as I have, I don't put him on that stand because he's not very good scripted. And if I'm the lawyer, I say, I take my chances. I have to give him the benefit of the doubt. But interesting point of view. Let's look at three areas. If you look at the Perez dilemma, three situations that really led to his downfall. One, lying to state investigators. Let's talk about that. When it's fairly clear that you've lied to state investigators, what does that do to the credibility, and what does that do for the jury when they see, okay, the guy's capable of lying?
The kind of work that we do...
And I'm sorry, lying about whether or not he paid for the counters.
The truth is it doesn't matter what the lie is. What we always advise our clients in these kind of situations, we all make mistakes. But most people, when they're being investigated for some kind of wrongdoing, they double the mistake. They double down because they either destroy something or they lie. If they would just do nothing and just stick with what they know to be true and just answer those questions or say nothing, they can win a lot more. When you lie, you've kind of shot your credibility, and these kinds of cases always come down to credibility.
My thought, Stan, is that the moment this state inspector knocked on his door, he should have called his lawyer. He should have said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to speak to anyone about this, and followed his lawyer's advice. Generally, speaking with an investigating officer or an investigating official is not going to help you, especially if you've done something wrong.
Coming from two lawyers, I'm surprised you said that. Call your lawyer first, right?
No matter what you say, it's the job of the person who's interviewing you to find a crime.
In hindsight, had Perez simply said, listen, I asked this guy for the bill and he didn't produce it, would that have helped him? Because apparently in the trial he did ask for the bill at some point. It wasn't produced. Had he kept that storyline, does that help him? I asked the guy for it. I'm still waiting.
Enormous. That would have made a huge difference, but he's not on record with that, so it doesn't come into the trial.
2 minutes left.
I think at the moment that he said, I have a bill, I paid a bill, and then couldn't produce it, the case was gone at that time.
The Abe Giles deal, we have about 2 minutes left. Go through these very quickly. The Abe Giles deal, the parking deal where the city council is circumvented. Giles has no contract. He basically is making money off running a parking garage that the parking authority should be running. How does that play to the jury saying, gee, why is that going on? How bad is that?
I think the problem with that is nobody on a jury can really understand all the different things a mayor has to do. And so the fact that he might say to Citino, well, you got to go take care of him.
The developer.
Right. That's the sort of thing that you do legally have to do. If the guy has a possessory interest in the property, you have to take care of him. But the way Mr. Citino heard it, take care of, had a different connotation. And the jury was apparently persuaded by that connotation because they heard from Citino and they didn't hear from Perez.
And let's talk about the dyslexia defense, that, gee, the mayor has dyslexia, and he didn't see this very telling email from Citino, the developer, saying, listen, this guy Abe Giles is trying to shake me down for $100,000. The dyslexia defense is that, in hindsight, was that a miscue?
That was a media phenomenon. The lawyers never actually advanced a dyslexia defense. It happened to be that one of the witnesses identified the fact that he had this difficulty, and so now it's in the case. But the lawyers never really argued dyslexia. It was just part of the mix, and it really did make great fodder for people to talk around their kitchen table.
But it wasn't really a buzz inside the courtroom.
Well, it was a buzz inside the courtroom.
It was a buzz inside the courtroom. It was there.
But it wasn't advanced.
Right.
It wasn't advanced by the lawyers themselves, but it became a part of the case because once the witness talked about it, the prosecutor then talked about it in his closing argument, and the defense lawyer had to address it. Now, had the mayor taken the stand and explained a lot of the issues that were put forth through other witnesses, perhaps the jury would have understood his case a little better. But I think when you try to put your case on through other witnesses, it falls short, and it did in this case.
In about 30 seconds, the mayor is facing about 60 years maximum. He wants to appeal. The appeal could take 2 years. What are your thoughts on an appeal? And does he have the option of going to jail on appeal or holding off? I'm unclear about that.
Well, he can ask the court, and his lawyer will ask the court, to set an appeal bond, and he can post an appeal bond. That's separate and apart from the original bond that he posted in the case. Most people do not want to go to jail while their appeal is pending, because then if you win on appeal, the state doesn't give you that time back. So my guess is that he will ask for an appeal bond, and the court will set an appeal bond, and he will stay out of jail until the appellate court or the Supreme Court hears the case.
Thoughts on the appeal, or anything you see there is tangible? The fact that they commingled the cases with Abe Giles and with Costa, they were arguing that they should do it separately. Is that something that's plausible?
That's the number one issue, and it is plausible, but there's a lot of case law that gives the discretion to the judge to manage the judge's courtroom. And so it's not an odds-on winner, but it is a legitimate issue here because, especially for a public figure, you take a little bit of the damage from this case, a little bit of the damage from this case, and it crosses over and it hurts.
In addition, he might have wanted to testify on one of the cases and not testify on the other, and that was a theory advanced by his lawyer. That's something the appellate court will consider. All
right, he's Mike Giorgetti. He's Jim Bergen, two of Hartford's top lawyers. When we come back, folks, we'll continue our discussion. We'll talk with Ken Kennedy and also another council person, Luis Cotto, about the future of Hartford with a new mayor and what it means for the capital city. Don't go away. You're watching The Stan Simpson Show.